Hi everyone, welcome to our session on what's new extending Copilot using AL code. I'm Derek Ju. With me are Julia, Sandy, and Enrico. Let's get started. So on the agenda for today, we'll do a very small recap on what's in our developer tools. Then Julia will talk about what's new in the prompt dialog. I'll continue on talking about token counting and function calling. Julia will take over talking to us about keeping the models current. And Sandy will come in talking about managed and shared AI resources. And then Enrico will end it off with top questions. So let's get started. So developer tools recap. So some of you may have worked with our AI module or our prompt dialog. But for those who have not, there is the session, What's New Designing and Developing Generative AI Experiences for Your Extensions. This is from a previous launch event. So you can find the YouTube link there, and it's available for everyone. So just to do a small recap, for those who have not seen this before, this is the prompt dialog. So this is for the marketing text suggestions. You can see this is the result when it has generated a marketing text. In this prompt dialog, there is the keep it, regenerate, cancel options. It also allows you to change your parameters, for example, tone, format, and emphasis. And these are things you can play with and configure in the prompt dialog. So another example that we have is with bank reconciliation. So this one looks a little more simple. The basis of it, you have to keep it and you have discard it. However, there's no changing of parameters at the bottom as per marketing text suggestions. Additionally, we have the AI module, which is in the system application for working with Azure OpenAI, specifically for large language models. So you have calls to text completions, getting the embeddings, or chat completions. I do want to highlight it is not for image, for example, with DALL-E, or transcribing speech to text with Whisper. The module also gives you ease of control and viewing of the Copilot capabilities within your environment. And it also gives you telemetry, allowing you to track like a capabilities registration, usage, and what errors you might find. So now Julia will talk about what's new in the prompt dialog. Julia?
Thank you, Derek. So let's talk about it. Derek showed the prompt dialog to you, and I'm going to tell you what's new in this release. First of all, now we can provide concise instructions to help users get started. They will be displayed as an instructional text if you update the instructional text property on fields in your prompt area in the prompt dialog. So to achieve the displayed instructional text, if you update the instructional text on this input text field, it will display this text. It is worth mentioning that it is not meant to be used as example prompts. This is the general instruction to help your users understand what is the expectations of them to input into the prompt dialog. When it comes to providing understanding and prompt templates, we have prompt guides coming to you. In that, this book icon is displayed on the prompt dialog. And after clicking, you can input there a lot of templates to help your users understand the breadth of the prompts that you created. So, for example, you could one or more prompt guides that will act as prompt templates. And to do that, we have created a new area in the actions on a prompt dialog page type, which is the prompt guide area. And then you input actions that then can replace the text on your field inside, as presented here on the screen. What's more, you can group those prompt guides in case you have more than one to help your users. For that, simply create a group inside the prompt guide area on the prompt dialog. Outside of the prompt dialog, we have Copilot actions that can be displayed on the lists, list parts, worksheets, and standard dialogues in order to draw attention and launch your prompt dialogs. As you can see on this screen, they are then displayed on the bottom of the page, all of your actions, Copilot actions on that page, as well as in the menu. How do you implement such a Copilot action? Again, there's a new area in Actions. on lists, list parts, worksheets, and standard dialogues, as I mentioned, and it is called prompting, where you can put your actions, such as the previous one displayed, draft with Copilot. I've talked about the AL side of the new prompt dialogue features that we have, but this session is part of a pair. If you want more about generative AI experiences, how to design them, when and where to use Copilot actions, you should check out What's New, Designing Generative AI Experiences, where Jakob and Søren will talk about it. And now I'll give it back to Derek for token counting.
Thank you, Julia. So, token counting. What is this for? So token counting allows you to count the number of tokens that will be used by your input before sending a request to Azure OpenAI. So specifically, it's the input, and it does not count your output because the output requires it to have been generated already. And now, what are tokens? So tokens are specifically, they are used by the model because the model does not take in words, or it also doesn't return words. They work with tokens. So for example, with an input, tell me about the solar system. The tokenized version are these numbers. The spaces are there only for our readability. So for example, with the first one, 41551, that would represent tell. And this is not an exact representation. However, it's what the tokenized version is. It's not always a one word to one token. And in this case, we have 7 tokens. So why is it important? So why should you token count? You would like to evaluate how many tokens are going to be used, because then you can estimate what your potential cost is. Because your cost and number of tokens you're going to use are related. So for every 1,000 tokens, there's an associated amount of cost depending on the model that you're using. It's also important to note when you use or how much tokens you're going to use, because a model has a limit to how many tokens they are that it can actually take in as input. And now if you have a prompt when including the data that you're going to send in is greater than the number of tokens available for the model, you're going to have to split that request up into multiple requests. So this is also very beneficial for you to know the exact number of tokens you're going to use so that you can determine, all right, how you're going to split up your requests for each request you're going to make. Now, how do you use this? The methods can be found in the AOAI token code unit. And we have methods per model. So for example, get GPT-3.5 token count, get GPT-4 token count, get ADA token count, and DaVinci token count. One thing I wanted to highlight is that these methods are version agnostic. So whether you're using GPT-4 January version or GPT-4 June version, it does not matter because they're all GPT-4. And also whether the difference between GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo, there's also no difference in the tokenizer being used. As such, the same function will work across all of them. As of right now, the methods do not include our provided system meta prompt, but that will be coming. Additionally, I would like to point out, so when you're using this, for example, here where we call get GPT-3.5 token, the input is of type secret text. And why is that? And the reason for that is because your input, we consider that to contain your intellectual property, which is the system meta prompt that you would have used, whether it's ours or your own when developing your Copilot capability. Next up, on function calling. So firstly, what are tools? Tools are like code interpreter, knowledge retrieval, or when you're building your own with function calling. You may have played with these on ChatGPT, and these are similar to how they'll work here. So what is function calling? It allows you to describe functions to the assistant or model and have it return the functions that should be called along with the arguments that should be put into those functions. The function to be called and arguments depend on the user input given to the assistant. What benefits does function calling bring? So it's able to then extract key information from natural language and allow you as a developer to use them as arguments for your functions. So let me give you a few kind of scenarios that this can be used for. determining an intent of the input, the natural language. For example, if you have functions to look up documents or items. So two examples of those would be if your user says, I need items from the last invoice. Now you know it's able to then determine, hey, I actually need to do a lookup for what documents this is. Or another example is I need to rent bicycles, and then that will be a lookup for items. A larger example would be you receive an email, and in this email, they would like to purchase some items. So firstly, you need to determine, okay, what's the intent of this email? Is it just a regular email, or would they like to purchase something? From there, then once you've determined, okay, this is a purchase intent, now have the model to extract the content for creating a customer. And there, you can then also extract the items that they would like to purchase and then create a sales invoice and send that along to them. So how does all this kind of look like? Here, I show you the HTTP request. I'll be showing you the AL code in a little while. I want to point out what are the important parts that make up function calling. So for the request part, you have the name. So in this case, it's the get current weather. And this is important for us developers. It's not so important for the model. The important bit is the description. Now, the description tells the model, what does this function actually do? It allows it to then understand, like, okay, if the user is asking something about weather, this may be the function I want to end up calling. Then you have parameters. In this case, my function get current weather takes in two parameters. One is location, and the other one is unit. And lastly, you have a key required. So required basically tells the model that, hey, these are required arguments that I need returned to me. So in this case, I'm only telling it, hey, I need the location. Whereas the unit can either be blank or it can be filled in depending on what kind of context is gathered from the input. And on the response of what the model returns to us, there's the tool calls array. And in that part, it has the name of the function that is to be called. So in this case, get current weather. And then there are the arguments with the values that should be called with that function. So in this case, it has location, which says San Francisco, CA, and the unit that says Celsius. So how does all this look like in AL? So this setting up your capability and your authorization, etc., are all part of the session I had mentioned earlier. So I will not go into details about that. However, we'll start with how you add your tool to the chat messages. So here I'm adding my tool, and it calls getWeather Copilot function. And I have my getWeather Copilot function here, where it actually just reads text into my JSON object and returns that. I do note this is only for demonstration purposes. You should not be putting your function as text in your code like this. You should always retrieve them from isolated storage or Azure Key Vault, for example. Because your description, as I had mentioned, these can be considered IP because they're describing what the model should do with the function. Now we come back to the overall function. Next up, I'm going to set my tool choice. So the tool choice basically tells the model, hey, I want you to always run this function. And in this case, it's called the get current weather. I'll go into a bit more detail after this example of the pros and cons of that. Next up, I'll add a user message to simulate a user actually typing in something of what is the weather like in San Francisco. From there, I'll call get generate chat completion for it to go call Azure OpenAI. And there, I'll check whether it's been a success or not. If it has not, I'm going to throw my error so I know what it is. However, if it's a success, now I need to actually interpret, okay, what is the response that came back. So I read it into my JSON object and then process the response. So how does the processing look like? So on the right, you see the same response that I had shown earlier, and the AI code on the left. So firstly, I need to check, okay, hey, are we calling some kind of tool? And in this case, I want to check if it's a function. So I take that out from the array and determine what is the type. And if the type is of type function, I want to continue because that's the only type that I'm going to be working with here. I take out the name because I know I've only built it with getCurrentWeather. I just need to validate this is the actual function that it is calling. And from there, I'm going to now extract my arguments, which I'm going to put into my function that I'm going to call. So from there, I take out my location. I know it is required, so it should be there. And I set the unit to be Celsius by default because I do not know if it's actually going to be there, as I did not specify that it should be required. And from there, I create a function that basically puts in, calls getWeather, and puts in the location and the option of the unit. And from there, I do some kind of call to a weather service and return some value. So the things I want to note, where with set tool choice, you can either put auto, which is the default, and you do not need to set that, or you can put a specific function. So with auto, it is the default. And if you use it with functions, the response can either be a function or it can be a regular chat response. So you do have to take note because if you expect a function and it doesn't give you a function, you want to handle that error properly and whatnot. And if you set a specific tool, specific function, it will guarantee that the response will always call that function. However, if your user inputs something that is unrelated to the function that's going to be called, you will want to validate if the arguments they're giving is valid or not. That's all for function calling. I'll now hand it back to Julia to talk about keeping current.
Thank you, Derek. Let's talk about keeping current. Models are updated with new features and improvements, such as function calling that Derek just described. That means that each model, GPT 3.5 Turbo or GPT-4, will have multiple versions, such as, for example, a March version and the June version. That means that the new version may perform differently to the one you tested on. Think about it. Over time, the versions that are released will perform differently. How can you make sure that you still deliver the exceptional quality of service? I will talk about how we take care of this in our Microsoft Build features. So to inspire you to implement a similar or a different model that will enable you to keep up with the ever-changing versions of the models. So how do we take care of this? We keep two versions of each model available, latest and preview. Note that we don't really specify if the latest is the June model. The latest is what we consider the latest stable released model. And then the preview will be the new and upcoming model that we want to make available for testing before we update our production features to this new upcoming model. And how do we implement this in our features? First, we choose the desired model and version. For example, my feature will be working on GPT 3.5 Turbo, the latest version. That gives us a version agnostic string that just mentions that it's the Turbo latest version. And then, before calling Azure OpenAI, I map it to the version, AOA Azure OpenAI version that I consider latest. For example, the June model. And then generate the response. So let's talk about the process that we implement when the new model version arrived. Let's say currently in production, my feature uses the Turbo latest and the Turbo preview function. Both of the strings map to the model version A. And then a new version B is released. So what do I do? First, I change the mapping of the preview function to map to version B, the new released version. And then I notify the teams using the latest version, so then developers can test on the new and upcoming preview version, adjust the feature if needed, and then release those changes, those adjustments to production and change the mapping of the latest function to also map to version B. This way, model version B is released to production with all the adjustment it needs, and we can wait for the version C to be released to do this process all over again. That's it for keeping up with the new model versions. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sandy to talk about managed and shared AI resources.
All right, thanks, Julia. Hello, everyone. I'm Sandy Winarko. I'm a product manager for Business Central. And in this part of the presentation, I will introduce you to managed and shared AI resources. So as you heard from my colleagues, we have enabled our partners and ISVs to build third-party Copilot features quickly using developer tools for Copilot in Business Central. The current approach that we use is to use a self-managed and dedicated AI resources by bringing your own Azure OpenAI account. This approach has jump-started and accelerated the exploration and journey to infuse AI into their Business Central extension and solution. In fact, in our recent AI Partners Hackathon alone, hundreds of AI-infused solutions were built. So that's pretty impressive. But now, when it's time to bring this AI-infused solution into production at scale, especially when they are combining multiple Copilot features built by different partners or ISV and targeting many customers, this approach has a few challenges. One of the challenges is it's still unclear how many Azure OpenAI accounts are needed and who should bring them. Whoever brings the Azure OpenAI account must satisfy the requirements for responsible AI for all features built on it. It is also unclear how to separately track the usage and costs of multiple Copilot features built by different partners or ISV, as well as features that used by many customers when they share the same Azure OpenAI account. And finally, bringing your own Azure OpenAI account still requires manual efforts to manage those resources. You need to to deploy, to load balance, scale, upgrade, monitor, or even troubleshoot the relevant Azure resources using the many different tools available in Azure. So consequently, it is time for us to improve and scale this approach by introducing managed and shared AI resources that eliminate these challenges. So you will not need to bring any Azure OpenAI account anymore. Partners and ISV can simply focus on satisfying responsible AI requirements to access our shared resources, building their Copilot features based on their intellectual property, and promoting just the value-added benefit of those features to all customers. Also, there's no need to track the usage and cost of these resources to run their Copilot features. We will track them all for all customers, and we will govern price and bill resource consumption in a unified and simple way for all Copilot features that covers first-party and third-party features, right? And finally, there's no more need to spend any efforts to manage those resources. So you don't need to deploy, load balance, scale, upgrade, monitor, or troubleshoot these resources anymore. We will manage them all in our infrastructure with always latest model version for all customers. So just like any other managed and shared resources in Business Central Online, such as compute, databases, and web service requests, we will track consumption and apply resource governance to control how fast and how much you can consume AI resources, ensuring fair use and as well as unlocking a value proposition. So how do we apply resource governance to this managed and shared AI resources? We will introduce a single AI resource consumption unit or currency. Let's just call it for now AI credit, right? And this AI credit will be convertible to various consumption unit of supported AI resources. So it'll be converted to GPT 3.5 tokens or machine learning prediction row, etc., etc. But all you need to know is just a simple single currency. AI credit, right? And this will assist a customer to budget and control their AI resource consumption and standardize resource governance concept and measure, such as operational limits. So we will use operational limit, ensure fair use among user, environment, and customer by controlling how fast they can consume AI credits. So high enough, this limit, to satisfy the throughput requirement for most customers. We will introduce the concept of entitlement quota to unlock the value of Copilot-enabled Business Central. For example, we will introduce base capacity in AI credit, as well as we can differentiate user licenses by introducing accrued capacity in AI credit to make sure that most customers will find their aggregated quotas of this base and accrued capacity sufficient to cover their aggregated consumption in each billing period. And finally, there will be a concept of excess consumption. So we want to be able to provide flexible option for only a few customers whose aggregated consumption might actually exceed their aggregated quota. So this customer can actually buy or purchase additional quotas or incremental capacity also in AI credits. So this capacity-based resource governance and pricing will be modeled and finalized through simulated limit and quota enforcement in private or public preview. So you might ask, when is private and public preview? You're in luck, because we already have a roadmap outlined for this managed and shared AI resources. Private preview will happen pretty soon after the Business Central launch event. A survey, keep your eye open for a survey that will be sent maybe through a Yammer channel, and a selected partner or ISP will be invited to participate. In this private preview, we will simulate limit and quota enforcements against varying resource consumption patterns to actually model and finalize the proper limit and quotas. So we want to finalize the proper base, accrued, and incremental capacity. So the ETA for private preview is pretty soon. So this 24.x release, so either 24.0 in April or 24.1 in May, right? Next public preview, we will introduce a new process to satisfy responsible AI requirement. Because you're not using Azure OpenAI accounts anymore, so you will have a new process to make sure that your feature comply to responsible AI, right? And then in public preview, we will also make sure that the proper limit will be published and enforced, while the proper quota might also be published, but will not be enforced to allow you some grace period to get used to these new concepts. So the ETA for public preview will be the next release around 25.x version. And finally, general availability is when the proper limits and quota will be both published and enforced. The ETA is still to be determined, or TBD, depending on the preview feedbacks and result. With that, I'm concluding my part of this presentation, and I'll pass the baton to my colleague, Enrico.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very exciting. So I'm Enrico, and I'm going to cover the last part of this presentation. It's going to be about the top questions we got about the developer toolkit for Copilot in Business Central. These questions are a collection of questions we got from you partners as part of your normal communication channels, for example, through Yammer or through direct communications with us. But also, they come from the AI hackathon we had a few weeks ago that Sandy already mentioned. I just want to say that we are very inspired by all the features you came up with during the AI hackathon. And it's really great for us to see how you can help us extend Copilot and make our product even better through AI. Let's start with the top questions. So why does the toolkit not support the latest features of Azure OpenAI? I will answer these in a second. Then, which Business Central data does Azure OpenAI have access to? And then, linked to this, how can I use my data with Azure OpenAI? And then, last question, what model should I use for my scenario? Let's start with the first one. Why does the toolkit not support the latest features on Azure OpenAI? Some of you might have noticed some features and capabilities that Azure OpenAI offers, such as the data sources capability, which we don't really expose as part of our toolkit. There are two reasons for that. The first reason is that some of these capabilities are considered previous specifications on Azure OpenAI side. A couple of weeks ago, we got a new GA specification, so a generally available one. But before that, it has been like several months before we had another GA specification. And in the toolkit, we will not support any preview specification at all. There is one more layer to that, which is we don't necessarily want to support all the features from Azure OpenAI into our AI toolkit. And the reason is that there are a lot, and we need your help to prioritize. So engage with us, talk to us on Yammer, tell us what you need, and then we'll prioritize the next feature that we'll make available in the toolkit. Let's jump to the second question. Which Business Central data does Azure OpenAI have access to? The answer is none. Our commitment is that your data is your data. You own your data. The models will not learn from your data. We will not feed all of your database to the AI model, nothing like that. You are in control. But that also brings kind of a follow-up question, which is, what if I need to give my data to the model? How can I use my data with Azure OpenAI? And the answer is, you need to fit all the data that Azure OpenAI needs into your prompt. So this has some limitations, because prompts have a size limit, which means, for example, if you have 1 million items, you cannot really fit information about all these items into the prompt you give to Azure OpenAI. So you need to be a bit creative. For example, get the model to suggest you the item category. Or maybe you know already the item category, so you can filter down your items just to the ones that belong to this category. Of course, permissions always apply. So the Copilot feature will work within a user session, and the permissions of that user will be the ones that apply to data. There are other options for you to bring your data into Azure OpenAI, such as the data sources capability I mentioned earlier. And just reach out to us, tell us your scenario, tell us what you think, and help us prioritize. For example, help us decide whether we should implement the data source functionality in the AI toolkit or not. And the last question is, what model should I use for my scenario? Well, our recommendation is to use GPT 3.5 Turbo whenever it fits your needs, because it's faster, first of all. It's also cheaper for you. And we've seen internally that it can cover well most of the scenarios. There are cases, such as if you have a lot of tokens and you run into the token limitation for your model, or in case you need like some more complicated AI scenario, so the generation quality with 3.5 Turbo is not good enough, then you should, of course, upgrade to GPT-4 or even GPT-4 Turbo. But the bottom line is just use the cheaper and faster model that fits your needs. So with this one, I'm done with the top questions, but I have one more bonus slide for you. We got a lot of questions that are more generic about AI and Azure OpenAI. For example, what are embeddings? Or how do I write a good prompt? Or which regions are available on Azure OpenAI? And we won't give answers to these because these are more generic questions. But what we suggest to you is go and explore the Azure OpenAI website, take trainings. There are some good beginner trainings on AI and large language models in Microsoft Learn website. So go take these trainings. Unfortunately, we don't have a BC tailored training for you available at this time, but we still suggest go there and learn and take some programming language independent trainings so that you can start learning and get started with AI. AI is here to stay. That concludes my part, and I will also quickly go through some other sessions that you might be interested in this launch event. So as Julia mentioned earlier, there is a sibling session to ours, which is designing generative AI experiences. Go and have a look at this session as well. It's really important to design your experience right, not only to know how to use the AI code behind the scenes. We also have quite a few sessions that are about the end user experience with AI. For example, sales line suggestions with Copilot, or AI-powered analysis with Copilot, or e-invoice matching with Copilot. All these are end user features, but you as a developer might be interested in seeing how we as Microsoft implement Copilot and think about Copilot. So go see these sessions as well. Now, the AL part of our toolkit is actually open source. It's part of our aka.ms/bcapps repo in GitHub. And you can contribute to this repo. You can have a look at the code behind the scenes. And to learn more on how to do this and what are the implications of this and how we handle open source, there is a great session which is Going Open Source with the new GitHub repository for Business Central. Go and attend this session as well. Some closing remarks. I've said this already. I'll say it again. Microsoft Cloud runs on trust. AI is no exception. Your data is only yours. It's your data. The AI models are not trained on your data. They don't learn out of your data. We actually go through super restrictive compliance reviews that are even more strict than what the law requires us to do, because we want you to trust us and trust that your data is yours. I'll close with some links for you. You can learn more about our Copilot features on aka.ms/bcai. I mentioned engaging with the team. You can do that and engage with us on Yammer. You can see the forward link on screen. It's available for partners only. If you want to download some samples to see how you can make use of the AL part of the toolkit and in general prompt dialog and other parts of the toolkit as well, you can do that from aka.ms/bctech. Find the Azure OpenAI folder. These are not production-ready code, but it's just to show you how you can interact with the toolkit. You can apply for an Azure OpenAI service key. This is while you wait for Sandy's announcement to come into place for everyone. You can do that aka.ms/OAI apply. And finally, all we talked about and all the toolkit documentation is at aka.ms/bc start coding with AI learn. Then we have some generic Business Central resources. You've seen these a billion times, so I will just skip through them. If you have to remember one, it's aka.ms/bcall. All links are in there. And with that, I conclude the presentation. And thank you for your attention. See you next time.